Two of my favorite things are animals and science, so why not apply them to Dragon's Dogma 2? And by that, I mean let's take a look at how some of the monsters have evolved to fit their environments. As this time we have around 2 distinct countries with completely different environmental conditions. We will mainly be looking at monsters with multiple subtypes, although there are a couple I want to cover that have no subtypes. And we will see how they evolve to fit their environment, and what those adaptations help them with, while going over any animals that also do this in the real world. And finally give them a grade based on how accurate these adaptations are to real life. So, with that out of the way, we can begin with everyone's favorite monster, the Saurians. The joke was that this isn't anyone's favorite monster. These scaly guys are quite interesting when you look at them and their adaptations. Probably more so than the rest, so let's start with the base version. Looking at the base Saurian, we can see that they act as basic giant monitor lizards, honestly. They live near water, lay eggs, and like to bask in the sun. What's interesting is how they can actually use spears and set up basic wooden structures to hang fish, meaning they aren't the lizard brains you might think they are. But the major adaptation we can see in the Saurian is their ability to drop their tails. This is called tail autotomy. It is a self-defense technique of many lizards, and actually in the design works for Dragon's Dogma 1, the page on Saurians says you should only chop the tails of Saurians and not kill the Saurian outright, as they're not really bad guys. It gets a B. I like the inclusion of the tail falling off as it makes this pretty standard enemy somewhat interesting. Moving on from the base version of Saurians and getting into the subtypes now, we have the Asp. The Asp is modeled after the Gila monster, a huge reptile with a venomous bite. You can see the trademark pattern much more clearly when the Asp isn't coated in poison. And like the Gila monster, the Asp tends to be found more in arid climates. In the real world, Gila monsters are found in places like the southwest United States and northwest region of Mexico. This matches how asps are more commonly found in Batal, a desert-like country. As a reptilian and venomous creature, the desert is the best place for the asp, as the cold-blooded monster needs the sun rays to warm up. And on top of that, warmer environments allow for faster metabolic rates, an important factor in venom production, as the increased metabolism helps them generate their poisons. I give it an A+. Pretty accurate and cool. The Rattler is a large, stony variant of the Saurian. While there isn't a mineral-based organism in real life, there is a condition known as Tree Man syndrome that affects us humans, and it looks quite similar to stone. I'm not going to show a picture of it because it's fucking nasty, so search at your own risk. But a variant of this disease that affects Saurians could be the reason Rattlers look like this, and natural selection reinforced this trait in them. It could be that becoming more stone-looking allowed for them to camouflage better and ambush prey more effectively. And now that I think of it, there actually is a monster that has a trait similar to this that is confirmed in the lore. But we'll get to them later on in the video. So, I give the Rattler a B-. It is possible, but as a condition like this doesn't occur in lizards in real life, I can't say for sure. And as for the magma scale, they're just on fire for some reason. I'm not even going to get into them as I can't justify this at all. F+. I'm going to take a quick pause after that monster to explain something I mentioned. If you like biology like me, you most likely already know what natural selection is, but for those of you who don't, let me explain. Natural selection is a process in the wild where certain traits become more prominent in a population of organisms due to them helping the organism survive better. For example, in the case of the Rattler, becoming more stone-like would help them catch more prey, like I mentioned earlier, and this would result in those with that trait being healthier, stronger, and more well-fed, leading to them becoming the Rattler to mate and pass that gene on to the next generation, and the cycle continues. So that's the definition. Keep that in mind when we cover the rest of the monsters because it is the basis of adaptations. They are meant to help the organism in their environment or with their lifestyle. Serpents are pretty rare in my experience, and I almost forget they even exist. They are Saurian variants with long quill-like spikes on the backsides of their body, and possess lightning magic innately. It may seem extremely magical and whimsical and shit, but the possession of electrical magic isn't so far-fetched, as we have eels in real life, who are literally electric serpent-like creatures. So I'll give it a B- for plausibility. Next up we have Goblins. These guys are going to be a bit more adapted than the Saurians, and display more specific traits for what they need. Although it's hard to say if these traits are even real adaptations at all since goblins aren't technically traditional organisms. and a lot of their biology is unknown, as they are born underground through mysterious methods. Looking at the base goblin, the first thing that stands out to me is their red coloration. In the wild, animals who use bright colors like this tend to do this as a warning to other animals to stay away. However, most animals that do this do it because they are toxic, and goblins are anything but, so it could just be intimidation. I'll give it a D+, as it would be cool to see a small monster adapt its color for something like that, but I find it hard to believe. The hobgoblin is a larger and more intelligent variant of the standard goblin, utilizing tools and weapons more frequently than goblins. I'd compare hobs and goblins to early humans, or Homo erectus, to modern humans, or Homo sapien. Just think of hobgoblins as a more evolved version of the normal goblin, but for all we know they are the exact same species at different life stages. I hope we're not killing baby goblins. But they hit me first, so womp womp! I'd give it a C if they're not different species, but I'd prefer if they were different, which if that's the case, I'd bump it up to a B. Knackers are the Patali variant of the goblin, featuring a taller, more slender build when compared to a goblin. These traits lend themselves well to aid the desert survival of the knacker. Long, thin extremities help dissipate heat more effectively, which is actually similar to humans once again. I really like this aspect of the knacker and it is very biologically accurate, so I'll give it an A+. I never wanted to give these little shits the light of day, but due to the topic of today's video, I have no choice. These little grass hiders are sadly perfectly adapted to their hunting style, that being ambush. Their green coloration and smaller frames allow them to conceal themselves in grass exceptionally well. I swear they're almost invisible in the grass, it's kind of crazy. And I don't think I need to explain how being green helps you blend in with green grass, so I'm just going to give it an A+, and call it a day. Lastly, for our monsters with multiple subtypes is the Harpy. I have to admit though, they are far less interesting compared to the last two groups. For one, they are certainly more monstrous due to being a hybrid species, but on top of that, a lot of their adaptations seem to be for literally no good reason. But we will go over them one by one. The basic Harpy. A very large bird with the upper body of a female human. And along with the looks, they also seem to sound like human females. I can see these traits having been evolved to help the Harpy lure in human prey, but there's a better example for this later on, so by comparison the Harpy gets a B-. The Gore Harpy seems to only exist to be a harder and more durable version of the Harpy. They are extremely freaking ugly, so I think they are not luring in anybody. Super F! I hate these monsters in all regards. Now the Venom Harpy is a bit unique. It's a bird that can inject a venom into its victims. And as far as the real world goes, there is no examples of birds administering any sort of toxin, so that makes them quite unique. And as far as evolution is concerned, birds and reptiles do share a common ancestor, so it's not entirely out of the question that a bird could evolve venom, if they evolve down that lineage. So I'll give it a C. It could be possible. And I saved the best subtype of Harpy for last. The succubus always intrigued me, and that was for one simple reason. And it's this. The silhouette of the succubus looks exactly like a sitting woman. It actually made me have to look twice before I figured out what I was looking at. This is a much better adaptation when compared to just having an upper body and voice of a human. The wings look exactly like a long flowing dress, and I can only imagine how many poor men fell for this trick. A+. I love this aspect of the succubus.
Mini segment, mini segment, mini segment.
Time for a mini segment. All three of the monster categories we've talked about so far have one thing in common. They all hunt in packs. But what would you call the groupings of these monsters? Well, for goblins, you'd refer to a group as a malignancy. A group of saurians is a lounge, and a group of harpies is commonly referred to as a clamor on the internet, as it seems. Now back to the main show and on to the next group of monsters. The Griffin is obviously a flying monster. You can tell by the fact that it flies around. But the ability to fly has one notable effect on birds in real life. It allows them to not be confined to one location, allowing birds to spread farther and wider than land-based animals. This leads birds and other flight-enabled animals to have more diversity among their species, since with this mobility they gain access to many other environments, and leading to the animal needing to adapt to that new region. We don't see this in the Griffin, however, as they have absolutely no subtypes, and is actually one of the only monsters that doesn't have a subtype in Dogma. And is actually one of the only monsters that doesn't have a subtype in Dragon's Dogma 2. In reality, the Griffin would be adapted to multiple regions, and being built differently for different purposes. Some examples I can think of would be having a different shaped beak, longer legs, or even being sea-based like an albatross, with massive wings made for gliding long distances. I'll have to give the Griffin an F, flat out. Very missed opportunity. The Oxen and Chimera have one thing in common. Can you take a guess? It has something to do with their Batali subtype. I'll give you a second to think about it. I don't know why I actually wait while I'm recording. I can just edit it to give you time. Oh well. If you guess the pigmentation of their fur, then you'd be correct. Both the Batali Oxen and Gore Chimera have a darker fur color, and I don't think it's by coincidence. Animals that live in sunnier environments are known to develop darker shades of fur and skin to protect them from harmful UV rays of the sun. And with how little foliage there is in Batali, it's clear that this is the reason. Darker fur and skin contains more melanin, which blocks out UV from the sun and in turn protects the skin. It's pretty basic, but I'll give it a B. And finally we have the Minotaur and Ogre, alongside their counterparts the Gore Minotaur and Grim Ogre. Like our previous monsters, they have a common trait, but I won't make a guess this time. The trait is their long coats. For the Grim Ogre, who spends their time on the surface in the deserts of Batal, the long hair is quite useful. Long hair will help protect the skin of the ogre from sun exposure, and around its face will keep sand out of the ogre's eyes. Although, judging by the ogre's skin, I don't think it's helping much.
Wop wop.
Although another benefit of longer hair could be some insulation. Think of the hair almost like a natural shield against the sun's heat, since hair won't transfer heat to your body as effectively as if the sun made direct contact with the skin. I'll give it a B- for that. It makes sense, but for some reason it just isn't effective. Maybe the ogres just have bad skin though. And actually, speaking of the ogre's skin, this was the monster I was alluding to previously when talking about the Rattler's skin. It is confirmed that the protrusions on the ogre are calcified parts of the skin. So, glad we finally got to that, if it only took an entire video. But moving on to the Gore Minotaur. It really does make sense that they have the long coats, as they live in caves for the most part. Up until we get to the Unworld world, that is. Anyways, long hair doesn't seem to provide any benefit in cave environments, as the main concerns aren't about insulation. So I'd give it a D-. The only thing bringing up its score is because it's freaking cool. And I put this emoji in my script. Awesome. Well, there we have it. That ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but I also found it really interesting to look at these fictional monsters through a biological lens. I always loved learning about adaptations in animals since I was a kid, so this was really fun to me and I hope you enjoyed it too. Anyways, I'll see everyone next time, and
Bye bye.